"I will gladly tame your beast downstairs," the black cowgirl declared boldly, her weathered hand brushing against the mountain man's holstered revolver as she gestured toward the wild horses thrashing in the corral below his cabin. The townsfolk had already written her epitaph, another drifter who'd limp away defeated, crushed by forces beyond her understanding. They saw only skin and circumstance, never the fire burning behind her determined eyes. The mountain man himself stood silent as stone, scarred by his own battles with a world that demanded he choose between his conscience and his survival. His land held secrets that powerful men would kill for, and this stranger's unexpected arrival threatened to unravel everything he'd fought to protect. Would her defiant courage expose the truth that could save them both, or seal their destruction? The morning sun cast long shadows across Copper Ridge as Sage Thornfield guided her weary horse down the main street. Dust swirled around her boots as she dismounted outside the general store. Her saddlebags held little more than horse training tools and determination. Eyes followed her every step. Whispers trailed behind like smoke. The storekeeper barely glanced up when she approached his counter. "Looking for work training horses," Sage said. The man's laugh was sharp. "Ain't that kind of work around here for your type. Mrs. Henderson might need help with laundry." More snickers from the other customers. Sage kept her expression steady. "Heard someone's got difficult horses. Name of Stone Holloway." "That mountain man," the storekeeper shook his head. "His beasts are impossible, injured 3 trainers already. You'd be wise to stick to washing clothes." Sage touched the brim of her hat. "Where's his place?" "North Ridge. Follow the broken fence line." His voice carried a warning. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The ride to Stone's property took 2 hours through rough terrain. Ancient pine trees lined the rocky path. The air grew thinner as elevation increased. Finally, a log cabin came into view, perched on a cliff overlooking a natural corral carved into the mountainside. Below, horses moved like lightning. Their coats gleamed in the afternoon light. These weren't ordinary mounts. They moved with purpose, intelligence, and barely contained power. Stone Holloway emerged from his cabin. His frame filled the doorway. Gray streaked his dark hair. Weathered hands rested on his gun belt. His eyes held the wariness of a man who'd learned not to trust strangers. "You lost?" he asked. "Came about your horses." Sage dismounted slowly. "Town says they can't be trained." Stone studied her for a long moment. "They're dangerous. Sent the last trainer to the doctor with a broken arm. Every horse can be reached." She approached the corral's edge. "Just need to understand what they're protecting." The horses below moved in perfect formation. They circled something Sage couldn't quite see. Ancient symbols carved into the rock face caught her attention. The markings seemed familiar, though she couldn't place why. "Those animals aren't meant for riding," Stone said. "They guard this land." "From what?" Stone's jaw tightened. "People who want to take what isn't theirs." Down in Copper Ridge, Deputy Conrad Ashworth sat behind his desk reviewing property documents. Maps covered the wall behind him. Red pins marked parcels of land throughout the territory. Stone's property sat at the center, unmarked but not forgotten. A knock interrupted his thoughts. 2 men in expensive suits entered without invitation. "Holloway still refusing to sell?" the taller man asked. Ashworth nodded. "Stubborn as his horses, but pressure builds water behind a dam. Eventually something gives. Make sure it gives soon. Too much money riding on this." Back at the cabin, Sage watched the horses with growing fascination. Their movements weren't random. They followed patterns, almost like they were performing some ancient dance. The carved symbols in the rock seemed to pulse with meaning she couldn't grasp. "I'll give you 1 day," Stone said finally. "But when they throw you, don't come crying about broken bones." "Fair enough." Sage shouldered her gear. "Mind if I camp nearby? Long ride back to town." Stone pointed to a flat area near the tree line. "Water pumps by the cabin. Stay clear of the corral at night. They get protective after dark." As evening approached, Sage built a small fire and prepared simple food. The horses had settled into quieter movements, but their watchful presence remained. Stone emerged from his cabin carrying a steaming mug. "Coffee," he offered. She accepted gratefully. The brew was strong and bitter. They sat in comfortable silence watching stars emerge overhead. "Why do you really stay up here?" Sage asked. Stone's expression darkened. "Made a promise to someone important. Won't break it now. The horses are part of that promise. Everything here is." He stood abruptly. "Get some rest. Dawn comes early." That night, Sage dreamed of ancient voices and flowing water. Symbols danced behind her closed eyelids. When she woke, understanding flickered at the edge of her consciousness like candlelight in wind. The next morning brought crisp mountain air and nervous energy. Stone leaned against the corral fence watching her prepare. Other figures had arrived during the night. Elder Mary Whitehorse sat quietly on a fallen log, her dark eyes missing nothing. Several townspeople had ridden up to witness what they expected would be Sage's humiliation. Deputy Ashworth sat astride his horse at a safe distance. His presence felt deliberate, threatening. Sage approached the corral gate. The horses immediately focused on her. Their eyes held intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. She reached for the latch. "I will gladly tame your beast downstairs," she said to Stone, gesturing confidently toward the horses below while her hand brushed his holstered revolver as she moved past him toward the gate. Stone's eyes widened. The watching crowd held its breath. Even the horses seemed to pause in anticipation. Would her bold confidence prove justified, or would the untamed wilderness claim another victim? The corral gate swung open with a rusty creak. Sage stepped inside without hesitation. The horses backed away, muscles tensed for flight or fight. Their nostrils flared as they tested her scent. Stone gripped the fence rail. The townspeople leaned forward in their saddles. Deputy Ashworth's hand moved closer to his weapon. Everyone expected chaos. Instead, Sage stood perfectly still. She breathed deeply, letting the mountain air fill her lungs. Something about this place felt familiar. The carved symbols in the rock seemed to whisper secrets her mind couldn't quite grasp. The lead stallion approached first. His coat was midnight black with silver markings that matched the ancient petroglyphs. He stopped 3 feet away, ears forward, studying her with unusual intensity. Sage extended her hand palm up. Empty, peaceful. The horse snorted once, then stepped closer. His muzzle touched her fingers with surprising gentleness. "Impossible," someone muttered from the crowd. The other horses began to relax. Their rigid postures softened. They moved with less urgency, though their eyes never left Sage. She walked slowly toward the rock wall where the symbols were carved deepest. Her fingertips traced the ancient markings. Recognition flickered through her mind like lightning. These weren't random scratches. They told a story. Her grandmother's voice echoed from childhood memories, speaking words in a language Sage had forgotten she knew. Elder Mary rose from her log and approached the fence. Her weathered face showed no surprise, only quiet satisfaction. "You see them too," Elder Mary said softly. Sage looked up from the symbols. "See what?" "The old ways. The connection between land and spirit." The horses had gathered around Sage now. They stood calm as ancient guardians, no longer wild but watchful. Their behavior defied everything the townspeople believed possible. Stone climbed into the corral. His movements were careful, respectful. The horses accepted his presence without alarm. "How did you know?" he asked. Sage struggled to find words. "Something my grandmother used to say, about listening to the land before trying to command it." Elder Mary nodded knowingly. "Your grandmother was Mary Crow Feather. She carried the old knowledge." The revelation hit Sage like cold water. Memories she'd buried began surfacing. Her grandmother's stories about sacred places. Her ability to calm any animal with touch and patience. The songs she hummed while working with herbs and healing. "I remember now," Sage whispered. "She said the land would call me home someday." Deputy Ashworth spurred his horse closer to the fence. His face showed displeasure at this unexpected development. "Lot of superstitious nonsense," he called out. "Animals get lucky sometimes. Don't mean nothing special." But the townspeople were murmuring among themselves. They'd seen something that challenged their assumptions. Sage had accomplished in minutes what 3 experienced trainers couldn't manage in weeks. Stone moved to stand beside her. "My wife knew your grandmother. She told me about the bloodlines that carry the gift." "Your wife, Morning Star, she died 3 winters ago. Made me promise to protect this place." His voice carried old grief. "These symbols mark a sacred spring. The water runs pure here. It's why the horses won't leave." Sage pressed her palm against the rock wall. Energy seemed to flow through the stone into her hand. The petroglyphs weren't just decorations. They were a map, instructions, a covenant between people and land. "The spring feeds the whole valley," Stone continued. "Controls water rights for miles around. That's why certain people want this property." He glanced toward Ashworth, who was speaking quietly with the men in expensive suits. Their faces showed frustration and calculation. Elder Mary stepped closer to the fence. "Your gift isn't just with horses, child. You can read the old language, interpret what the ancestors left behind." The implications settled over Sage like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just another drifter looking for work. Her heritage connected her to this place in ways that went beyond employment. The lead stallion nudged her shoulder gently. His message was clear. She belonged here. The land recognized her. The horses accepted her authority because it was rightfully hers to claim. Stone watched her face as understanding dawned. Morning Star said someone would come, someone who could speak for the land when the time came. What time? When greedy men tried to steal what isn't theirs to take. Ashworth's voice carried across the corral. "Interesting show, but tricks won't change property law. This land's going up for public sale next month." Stone's jaw tightened. "Over my dead body. That can be arranged too." The threat hung in the mountain air like smoke from a grass fire. Lines were being drawn. Sides were being chosen. Sage found herself at the center of a conflict much larger than horse training. Elder Mary caught her eye through the fence rails. The old woman's expression was grave but determined. "The ancestors chose you for this moment," she said quietly. "The question is whether you're ready to accept what that means." Sage looked at the horses surrounding her, at Stone's weathered face filled with desperate hope, at the ancient symbols that seemed to glow with inner light. Her grandmother's blood carried responsibilities she'd never imagined, powers she'd never developed, knowledge that could save or destroy everything Stone held sacred. The horses waited patiently for her decision. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. That evening, Elder Mary returned with leather pouches and worn journals. She spread them across Stone's kitchen table while Sage studied the ancient writings by lamplight. "Your grandmother documented everything," Elder Mary explained. "Every symbol, every sacred site. She knew this day would come." The journals revealed a network of protected places throughout the territory. Springs, burial grounds, ceremonial sites, all marked with the same petroglyphs Sage had seen in the corral. "The water here feeds 7 valleys," Stone said, pointing to a hand-drawn map. "Control this spring, control the whole region." Sage traced the waterway with her finger. Towns, farms, mining operations, all dependent on the flow from Stone's mountain. No wonder Ashworth wanted the land. "Morning Star made me swear to protect it," Stone continued. "She said water wars were coming. Men would kill for what we take for granted." The next morning brought unwanted visitors. Ashworth arrived with a surveyor and 2 armed men. They set up equipment near the property line, measuring and marking. Stone confronted them at the fence. "You're trespassing." "Public easement," Ashworth replied smoothly, "preparing for the auction." "There won't be any auction. Court says different. Judge Wilson signed the order yesterday." Sage emerged from the cabin carrying her grandmother's journals. The surveyor's equipment interested her. She approached the fence where the men worked. "Checking water flow?" she asked innocently. The surveyor nodded without looking up. "Spring assessment for development potential." "Development ruins sacred sites." Ashworth's head snapped up. "Sacred to who? Bunch of old rocks don't mean nothing. They mean everything to the people who carved them." She opened one of her grandmother's journals. Pages of translated symbols filled the worn book, maps showing water sources, seasonal patterns, ceremonial grounds. Your grandmother was quite the scholar, Elder Mary had said. She knew they'd try to erase our history, so she preserved it. The surveyor studied Sage's journal with growing interest. His expression shifted from dismissive to concerned. These markings indicate a protected indigenous site, he said slowly. Ashworth snatched the book away. Bunch of scratches proves nothing. Actually, it proves everything. Sage retrieved the journal calmly. Federal law protects sites of cultural significance. Can't develop protected land. Says who? Says the Indian Preservation Act of 1869. The legal knowledge surprised everyone, including Stone. Sage's grandmother had taught her more than animal handling and plant medicine. She'd prepared her to fight battles using law instead of guns. That afternoon, word spread through Copper Ridge. The strange woman on Stone's mountain could read ancient writing. She understood laws most folks had never heard of. She wasn't just another drifter after all. The saloon buzzed with conversation. Some townspeople remained skeptical. Others began reconsidering their assumptions. A few even wondered if they'd been wrong about other things too. Deputy Ashworth sat in his office reviewing legal documents. His confidence had taken a serious blow. The journals contained more evidence than he'd expected. Professional translations, government correspondence, proof that multiple sites throughout the territory were legally protected. A telegram arrived from his mysterious backers. Their message was brief and threatening. Complete the land acquisition or face consequences. Meanwhile, Sage worked with the horses while Stone repaired fence lines. The animals followed her like devoted disciples. Their behavior demonstrated the deep connection between her bloodline and the sacred spring. "How long have you known?" she asked Stone. "About what?" "About what I am, what I can do." Stone set down his hammer. "Morning Star dreamed about you, said a woman would come who could speak both languages, old and new, bridge the gap between worlds. I don't feel ready for that responsibility. Nobody ever does. But the land chooses its guardians, doesn't ask permission first." That evening brought another revelation. Elder Mary arrived with 3 federal agents, real ones this time, not Ashworth's cronies. They wore official badges and carried proper documentation. "We've been investigating illegal land seizures throughout the territory," the lead agent explained. "Your grandmother's journals provide crucial evidence." They spread maps across Stone's table. Red pins marked sites where indigenous lands had been stolen through fraudulent sales. The pattern was extensive and deliberate. "Someone's been systematically targeting sacred sites," the agent continued. "Always the same method. Corrupt local officials, fake court orders, forced auctions." "Ashworth," Stone growled. "He's part of it, but there's a bigger network involved." Sage studied the maps with growing understanding. Her heritage wasn't just about reading symbols and calming horses. She was part of a resistance movement that had been building for decades. "What do you need from us?" she asked. "Testimony, documentation, proof that these sites have continuous cultural significance. And if we provide that, federal protection, legal precedent, an end to the land grabbing." Stone and Sage exchanged glances. This was bigger than saving one mountain spring. They were fighting for the preservation of an entire way of life. The horses gathered near the cabin as darkness fell. They sensed the importance of what was happening. Their calm presence reminded everyone that some bonds transcend human law and politics. "There's something else," the federal agent said quietly. "We have reason to believe the next phase involves violence. These people have too much invested to quit peacefully." The warning hung heavy in the mountain air. Sage felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy pressing down like storm clouds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, harder choices. The battle for Stone's Mountain was becoming a war for justice itself. The federal agents established their base of operations in Stone's cabin. Maps and documents covered every available surface. Agent Morrison, the lead investigator, worked methodically through evidence while his partners interviewed townspeople. "We've uncovered 15 fraudulent land seizures in 3 counties," Morrison explained to Sage and Stone. "Same pattern every time. Corrupt deputy creates false debt claims. Judge signs seizure orders. Land gets auctioned to predetermined buyers." Sage spread her grandmother's journals beside Morrison's official files. The correspondence matched perfectly. Sacred sites systematically targeted for development. "Who's behind it?" Stone asked. "Railroad syndicate. They need water rights for a transcontinental line. Your spring feeds the entire route through this territory." The revelation explained everything. Ashworth wasn't working alone. He was part of a conspiracy that stretched from local courthouses to corporate boardrooms in distant cities. Meanwhile, Ashworth paced his office like a caged wolf. Telegrams from his railroad contacts grew more demanding each day. The federal investigation threatened years of careful planning and substantial investments. He summoned 3 deputies from neighboring counties, men who asked few questions and followed orders without hesitation. Their arrival in Copper Ridge sent ripples of unease through the community. "Situation's gotten complicated," Ashworth told them. "Need to accelerate the timeline." The deputies nodded grimly. They understood their role without explicit instructions. At the sacred spring, Sage continued documenting petroglyphs with Elder Mary's guidance. Each symbol revealed deeper layers of meaning. The ancestors had encoded not just spiritual beliefs, but practical knowledge about water management and land stewardship. "They knew this conflict would come," Elder Mary observed. "The symbols warn about men who would poison the earth for profit. How could they know? Same greed, different generation. The patterns repeat themselves." Stone joined them at the spring's edge. The water bubbled up from deep underground, crystal clear and impossibly cold. Fish darted between smooth stones. Birds gathered to drink from pools that had never known drought. "Morning Star used to say the spring chose its guardians," Stone said quietly. "Said it would provide for those who protected it, and destroy those who threatened it, in its own time, its own way." That afternoon brought disturbing news from town. Agent Morrison's partners reported increased surveillance from unknown parties, strangers asking questions about the investigation, equipment being tampered with overnight. "They're getting nervous," Morrison concluded. "Desperate people make dangerous choices." He advised Sage and Stone to remain on the mountain until the investigation concluded. Federal protection could only extend so far into remote territory. As evening approached, the horses grew restless. They paced the corral with unusual agitation. Their behavior worried Stone, who had learned to trust their instincts over the years. "They sensed something coming," he told Sage. "Good or bad. With horses, usually bad." Elder Mary arrived after dark with troubling intelligence from the indigenous community. Ashworth's new deputies had been questioning tribal elders about sacred sites. Their methods were intimidating and increasingly aggressive. "They're mapping everything," she reported. "Not just your spring, every protected location in the territory." The scope of the conspiracy became clearer. This wasn't about one mountain or one railroad route. It was about erasing indigenous presence from the entire region. "We need more evidence," Morrison said grimly. "Testimony isn't enough. We need documents linking local officials to the railroad syndicate." Sage studied her grandmother's journals by lamplight. Hidden between pages of translations were letters and contracts, evidence her grandmother had collected over decades of careful investigation. She was building a case, Sage realized. All these years she was gathering proof. The documents revealed a network of corruption that included judges, surveyors, and territorial officials. Names, dates, financial transactions. Everything Morrison needed to build federal charges. "This changes everything," Morrison breathed. "We're not just talking about land fraud. This is conspiracy, racketeering, violation of federal treaties." But obtaining the evidence carried risks. Ashworth would kill to keep these secrets buried. The railroad syndicate had invested too much to accept defeat quietly. Stone checked his weapons while Sage transcribed crucial documents. Elder Mary prepared medicines and supplies for what might become a prolonged siege. Everyone understood the stakes had escalated beyond property disputes. The horses continued their agitated pacing as midnight approached. Their warning proved accurate when lantern light flickered through the trees below. Multiple riders were ascending the mountain trail. Morrison positioned his agents at strategic points around the cabin. Stone took up his rifle while Sage secured the precious documents. Elder Mary faded into the forest with the skill of her ancestors. "Remember," Morrison called softly, "we need them alive for testimony. No unnecessary force." But the approaching riders had different intentions. They came prepared for violence, not negotiation. Ashworth's desperation had reached its breaking point. The sacred spring bubbled peacefully in the darkness, oblivious to human conflicts. The ancient petroglyphs seemed to glow with inner light under the star-filled sky. The horses gathered at the corral's center, forming a protective circle around something invisible but precious. Sage felt her grandmother's presence in the mountain air. Generations of guardians had faced similar threats. The land had survived because people like her had chosen to fight for what was right. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder. The final confrontation was beginning. Everything her bloodline had preserved for centuries hung in the balance. The mountain held its breath and waited. The riders halted just beyond rifle range. Ashworth's voice carried through the darkness, artificially friendly but edged with menace. "Stone Holloway, we need to talk." Morrison stepped onto the cabin porch, badge gleaming in the lamplight. "Federal agents. You're trespassing on protected property." Ashworth's laugh was harsh. "Protected by who? Your investigation's been terminated. Orders came through an hour ago." He produced an official-looking document. "New territorial governor. Different priorities." Morrison studied the papers through binoculars. The seals appeared authentic. The signatures looked genuine, but something felt wrong about the timing. "Stand down, agent," Ashworth called. "This is local jurisdiction now. Federal law supersedes local authority on indigenous sites." "What indigenous sites? Don't see any Indians here." Elder Mary materialized from the shadows like smoke. Her weathered face showed calm determination. Behind her, a dozen tribal elders emerged from concealment among the trees. "You see us now," she said quietly. The standoff stretched taut as bowstring. Ashworth's men shifted nervously in their saddles. They'd expected to face a mountain hermit and a wandering woman, not federal agents and organized resistance. Sage stepped forward carrying her grandmother's journals. The moonlight seemed to gather around her as she approached the property line. "These documents prove continuous habitation for over 3 centuries, she announced. "This land has never been abandoned or unclaimed. Bunch of old papers don't change property law." "Actually, they do." Morrison's voice carried new confidence. "I just received confirmation. The territorial governor's orders are fraudulent. Real governors in Washington testifying before Congress about Western land fraud." The revelation hit Ashworth like a physical blow. His carefully constructed authority crumbled in seconds. The men behind him began questioning their position. "You've been played," Morrison continued. "Your railroad friends are cutting loose ends. Starting with you." Sage opened her grandmother's journals to pages she discovered that afternoon. Names, dates, financial records, evidence of bribes paid to territorial officials, documentation of fraudulent court orders. "It's all here," she said. "Every transaction, every forged document, every lie you've told for 3 years." Ashworth's composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. This railroad will make or break this territory. Don't let sentiment destroy progress. Progress built on stolen land isn't progress, it's theft." The horses in the corral began moving with purpose. They formed lines facing the intruders as if preparing for battle. Their behavior unnerved Ashworth's men further. Elder Mary stepped beside Sage. "The land remembers every injustice, every broken promise. It chooses when to demand payment." As if summoned by her words, clouds gathered overhead. The clear night sky darkened rapidly. Wind began howling through the pine trees with unnatural intensity. Stone emerged from the cabin carrying additional weapons. His face showed grim satisfaction. Storm coming. Dangerous to be on the mountain in weather like this. Lightning flickered in the distance. Thunder rolled across the peaks like ancient drums. The sudden weather change seemed to respond to the growing tension. Morrison's partners moved to flanking positions. Professional training told them this situation was deteriorating rapidly. Too many variables, too many armed parties in close proximity. "Last chance," Ashworth called. "Clear out now and nobody gets hurt." "Or what?" Sage challenged. "You'll add murder to fraud and conspiracy. Accidents happen in the wilderness. People disappear. Stories get forgotten." But his threats rang hollow now. The federal investigation had documented everything. Witnesses had given testimony. The evidence trail led directly to corporate boardrooms and corrupt politicians. The storm intensified with supernatural speed. Rain began falling in heavy sheets. Lightning strikes illuminated the mountainside in stark detail. The sacred spring bubbled higher, as if responding to the celestial display. "The ancestors are watching," Elder Mary said softly. "They approve of justice delayed but not denied." Ashworth's men grew increasingly uncomfortable. Horses shied at lightning flashes. Rain soaked through their coats. The romantic notion of night riding had dissolved into miserable reality. One deputy spoke up. "Maybe we should head back to town. Weather's getting dangerous." "We leave when I say we leave." But authority built on fear and corruption couldn't withstand natural forces and moral certainty. Another deputy turned his horse toward the trail, then another. Morrison sensed the moment turning. Federal marshals are already in position around Copper Ridge. There's no escape from this mountain that doesn't lead through federal custody. The bluff worked perfectly. Ashworth couldn't risk calling it because he suspected it might be true. His isolation became complete as his remaining men lost confidence. Sage approached closer to the property line. Rain plastered her hair against her head, but her voice carried clearly over the storm. "My grandmother spent 40 years documenting your crimes. Every stolen acre, every forged signature, every family driven from their land. She held up the journals like sacred texts. This is her testimony, speaking for people who had no voice in your courts." The lightning strikes grew more frequent. The mountain itself seemed alive with electricity. The horses stood calm in their corral while the human intruders fought panic. "Federal protection extends to all witnesses and evidence," Morrison announced. "Anyone who interferes faces charges under the Territorial Crimes Act." Ashworth realized his position had become untenable. The storm, the witnesses, the documented evidence, and the federal agents had created an impossible situation. His grand conspiracy was unraveling in the most humiliating way possible. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountain. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the sacred spring running higher than usual. Ashworth sat in federal custody, his hands bound, his authority stripped away like bark from a lightning-struck tree. Agent Morrison supervised the loading of evidence into secure containers. 3 years of meticulous documentation would finally see daylight in federal court. The conspiracy reached further than anyone had imagined. Railroad syndicate involved 47 officials across 6 territories, Morrison reported to his superiors via telegraph. Stolen lands valued at over $2 million. Say stood beside the spring watching water flow toward the valleys below. Clean water for 7 communities. Water that would have been poisoned by railroad construction and mining operations. Stone approached carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His weathered face showed peace for the first time in months. The burden he'd carried since Morning Star's death had finally lifted. "What happens now?" he asked. "Federal protection for all documented sites. Your land becomes part of a territorial preserve. No development, no seizures." "And you?" Sage smiled. Someone needs to manage the preserve, interpret the sites for visitors, bridge the gap between old knowledge and new laws. Elder Mary emerged from the cabin carrying additional tribal documents. Other sacred sites throughout the territory would receive similar protection. Generations of careful record-keeping had paid off at last. "Your grandmother would be proud," she told Sage. "Her life's work has borne fruit." The horses moved peacefully in their corral, no longer agitated guardians but content inhabitants of protected land. They had accepted Sage completely, recognizing her rightful place as their keeper. Agent Morrison finished his documentation and prepared for departure. Federal marshals would transport Ashworth and his accomplices to territorial court. The legal proceedings would take months, but the outcome was certain. "Congressional hearings start next week," he informed Stone and Sage. "Your testimony will help establish new precedents for indigenous land rights. We'll be ready." The ride down to Copper Ridge felt different this time. Townspeople emerged from buildings to watch the federal convoy pass. Some faces showed shame at their previous treatment of Sage. Others displayed curiosity about the woman who had changed everything. At the general store, the same clerk who had dismissed her weeks ago now waited nervously behind his counter. Sage entered alone, carrying official documents. "Miss Thornfield," he stammered. "Heard about what happened on the mountain." "Federal Preserve Manager," she corrected gently. "I'll be establishing an office in town. Hope we can work together." His relief was visible. "Yes, ma'am. Whatever you need." The transformation was complete but not vengeful. Sage had gained authority through dignity and knowledge rather than force or humiliation. The respect she commanded came from proven competence, not fear. 3 months later, the territorial courthouse buzzed with activity. Federal prosecutors presented evidence of the largest land fraud conspiracy in Western history. Railroad executives, territorial officials, and corrupt deputies faced justice for their crimes. Sage testified for 2 days, translating documents and explaining the cultural significance of stolen lands. Her grandmother's journals provided irrefutable proof of continuous indigenous presence and legal ownership. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty verdicts on all major charges. Sentences ranging from 5 years to life imprisonment. Complete restitution ordered for stolen properties. Judge Harrison read the final ruling with unusual emotion. "This court recognizes that justice delayed is not justice denied. The systematic theft of indigenous lands violated both federal law and moral decency." Stone received clear title to his mountain property in perpetuity. The Federal Preserve designation ensured protection for future generations. The sacred spring would flow freely forever. Sage established her headquarters in a building donated by repentant townspeople. Maps covered the walls showing protected sites throughout the territory. Her staff included both indigenous elders and university-educated researchers. "Cultural preservation through legal protection," she explained to visiting officials. "Respecting the past while planning for the future." The horses thrived under her continued care. They became symbols of successful cooperation between different communities. Visitors came from distant territories to see the animals that had helped expose corruption. Elder Mary served as cultural advisor, sharing knowledge that had been preserved through generations of careful guardianship. Her people's history was finally being documented and protected by federal law. Stone found new purpose as preserve superintendent. His mountain cabin became headquarters for conservation efforts across multiple territories. Morningstar's dream of protection had exceeded even her hopes. 1 year later, Sage stood beside the sacred spring watching sunset paint the peaks gold and purple. Federal legislation based on their case had protected thousands of acres of indigenous land. The precedent would influence policy for decades. Water flowed clear and cold toward the valleys below. 7 communities drank from springs that would never know pollution or development. Children yet unborn would play beside waters their ancestors had blessed. The horses gathered near the fence, calm and content. The petroglyphs seemed to glow in the fading light. Her grandmother's legacy lived on in preserved knowledge and protected land. Stone joined her at the water's edge. Think she knew how it would end. She knew justice finds its way, like water finding the sea. The mountain held its peace at last, and that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.